Light came first. Not a harsh light, not the blinding white flash Cameron Wells expected from every memory of emergency strobes and hull breaches, but a gentle, steady glow that seemed to seep into his awareness like morning sunlight through a thin curtain. For a long time he floated in that brightness, unsure whether he was awake or merely dreaming of being awake. His thoughts moved slowly, as if wading through deep water, and every attempt to focus slipped away before it could take shape. Sound followed. A distant rhythmic pulse, soft mechanical murmurs, and the faint whisper of air circulating through vents he could not see. None of it sounded like a ship in distress. That alone was enough to disturb him. The last thing he remembered was fire, alarms, and the terrible metallic scream of a hull tearing itself apart. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him curved gently, seamless and pale, threaded with lines of soft blue light that shifted slowly like living veins. Cameron stared at it for several seconds, trying to understand what he was seeing. It was not the ceiling of any medical bay he had ever known. It was too smooth, too quiet, too calm. Then a face entered his field of vision. She leaned over him, and for a moment Cameron wondered whether he was still dreaming. The woman looked almost human, clear skin, expressive eyes, dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. But there was one detail that refused to fit into any familiar category. Her ears were long, elegant, tapering gently to fine points that extended well beyond the line of her hair. She was smiling. Not the polite smile of a professional caregiver, but something warmer, something fragile, as if relief and disbelief were struggling to occupy the same space at once. There were tears in her eyes, though she seemed unaware of them. "Hello," she said softly. Cameron blinked. His throat felt dry, and when he tried to speak, the first sound that emerged was little more than a faint croak. "That's, not my best opening line," he managed after a moment, his voice rough. "Can I try again in 5 minutes?" The woman let out a small, surprised laugh, the sound bright and genuine. "You're speaking clearly already," she said. "That's better than I hoped." Cameron swallowed, trying to gather his thoughts. "Where am I?" he asked. She hesitated, as if choosing her words with care. "You are safe," she said first, which was not, Cameron noticed, an answer. "That's comforting," he said. "But I was hoping for something slightly more specific. A planet name, perhaps, or at least a room number." Her smile trembled, and for a moment she looked almost nervous. Then she reached out and gently adjusted a sensor near his temple, her movements careful and precise. "You have been asleep," she said quietly. "For a long time." Cameron frowned. Define long. Her eyes met his. 20 years. Silence filled the space between them, thick and heavy. Cameron stared at her, waiting for the punchline that did not come. "That's inconvenient," he said finally. The woman blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Inconvenient?" "Yes," Cameron said, his voice still hoarse but gaining strength. "I had plans. Lunch, for example. I assume I've missed it." She covered her mouth, laughter escaping before she could stop it, and Cameron found himself smiling, despite the strange numbness spreading through his thoughts. If he was dreaming, at least his imagination had a sense of humor. "There is more," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, uncertain. "Something you should know." Cameron raised an eyebrow. "If it's that I snore, I already knew that." Her hands folded together, and for the first time he saw the tension in her posture, the way her fingers pressed lightly against one another, as if bracing for impact. "You have been asleep for 20 years, she repeated, "and you are my husband." Cameron stared at her. He waited quite patiently for several seconds, certain that this was the part where someone would step out from behind a curtain and congratulate him on surviving an elaborate practical joke. No one appeared. "I see," he said at last. "Well, that does complicate things." "You do not remember," she said softly. "No," Cameron admitted. "I don't remember getting married. I don't remember meeting you. I barely remember my own name at the moment, although I'm reasonably confident it's Cameron. Unless I've been someone else for the past 20 years, in which case I owe that person an apology." Her expression softened, and for a moment the tension eased. "Your name is Cameron Wells," she said gently. "You were a pilot." "Was?" he repeated. She hesitated. You are, she corrected. Cameron exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a moment as fragments of memory flickered at the edge of his mind. Stars rushing past a cockpit canopy, the vibration of engines, the sharp scent of overheated circuitry. Then the memories faded, leaving only a hollow ache. When he opened his eyes again, she was still there, watching him with a mixture of hope and fear so raw it made his chest tighten. What's your name? He asked. Lyra'sen, she said. Well, Lyra'sen, Cameron said, his voice quieter now. It's nice to meet you. The words seemed to affect her more than he expected. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she turned slightly away, composing herself. I spoke to you every day, she said after a moment, while you were asleep. I told you stories. I told you about the stars outside the station, about the patients who recovered, about everything. Cameron considered this. Did I ever talk back? Sometimes, she said, and a faint smile touched her lips. Mostly nonsense. Once you insisted that a maintenance drone was plotting against you. That sounds like me, Cameron said gravely. You can never trust machines with too many legs. Lyra'sen laughed again, the sound lighter this time, and Cameron felt some of the strange weight pressing on his mind begin to lift. Whatever had happened, wherever he was, the universe had at least provided him with someone who could laugh, and for the moment he decided that was enough. When Cameron woke again, the light was different. At first he thought he had slept for only a few minutes, but the faint stiffness in his limbs and the quiet heaviness in his head suggested more time had passed. The ceiling above him glowed with the same calm blue veins of light, though now he noticed small points drifting across it. Tiny maintenance drones, no larger than insects, gliding silently along invisible tracks. One of them paused directly above his face. Cameron stared at it. The drone rotated slightly as if studying him in return. Don't even think about it, Cameron muttered. I know you're kind. The drone emitted a faint chirp and moved on. A soft laugh came from the side of the room. Lyra'sen sat at a console nearby, reviewing a series of floating holographic readouts that shifted in slow, translucent layers. She looked up when he stirred. You are awake again, she said. I had the strangest dream, Cameron replied. I thought a tiny robot was spying on me. It was, she said calmly. They monitor neural activity during recovery. Cameron blinked. I was joking. They were not. He considered this. I would like to file a formal complaint with the robot union. I will be sure to pass that along, she said, her eyes bright with amusement. He pushed himself slightly upright, wincing as unfamiliar weakness tugged at his muscles. The motion alone left him breathing harder than he expected, and he sank back against the support cushions with a frustrated sigh. This body feels like it belongs to someone who spent 20 years doing absolutely nothing, he said. That is an accurate assessment, Lyra'sen replied gently. Your muscles and nervous system are still recovering. It will take time. How much time? She hesitated. Weeks, perhaps months. Cameron stared at the ceiling again. Months. The word felt heavy, stretching forward into a future he could not yet imagine. What happened to my ship? He asked quietly. Lyra'sen turned her chair slightly, her expression growing more serious. It was found drifting, she said, severely damaged. The emergency pod had separated before the main hull failed. You were inside in stasis. Your life support systems were failing when a survey vessel detected the pod. And they brought me here. Yes. Cameron absorbed this in silence. He could almost see it, the dark, endless drift of space, the silent pod spinning through cold starlight, his body suspended between life and death while years slipped by unnoticed. That must have been a boring 20 years, he said at last. Lyra'sen tilted her head. For you, perhaps. For me, not at all. He glanced at her. There was no hesitation in her voice, only quiet certainty. I monitored your neural patterns, she continued. At first only to ensure the repairs were successful, but your brain remained active, even in deep coma. You dreamed. You spoke. I talk in my sleep. You argued with someone named Rodriguez for nearly 3 hours, she said. Cameron frowned. Rodriguez owes me money. I gathered that, Lyra'sen said, smiling. He studied her for a moment. You said you repaired my neural pathways. How bad was it? She did not answer immediately. Her fingers moved across the console, and a soft projection appeared in the air between them, a translucent model of a human brain, sections of it flickering with faint scars of light. There was extensive damage, she said quietly. Radiation exposure, hypoxic injury, microvascular collapse in several regions. Without intervention, your cognitive functions would have degraded beyond recovery. Cameron looked at the image, then at her. And you fixed it. I tried, she said. Well, Cameron replied, from my current perspective, you succeeded. Unless this is all a hallucination, in which case I have an excellent imagination. Lyra'sen laughed softly and dismissed the projection. A few minutes later, two small hovering devices entered the room, carrying what appeared to be trays of food. They settled onto a surface beside the bed, and Cameron eyed the contents suspiciously. One dish contained something that looked like translucent ribbons coiled in a shallow bowl, faintly glowing with a pale green light. That, Cameron said carefully, is not food. It is, Lyra'sen assured him. It is glowing. Yes, food should not glow. On your world, perhaps. Cameron picked up the utensil, a slender instrument that reshaped itself slightly to fit his grip, and lifted a small portion of the glowing ribbons. He examined it, then glanced at Lyra'sen, who watched with polite anticipation. Well, he said, if I start floating or speaking in ancient poetry, I'm blaming you. He tasted it. The flavor was unexpectedly mild, with a faint sweetness and a texture somewhere between pasta and something else he could not quite identify. That's actually not bad, he admitted. What is it? Lyra'sen hesitated. A protein culture derived from... You know what? Cameron interrupted, raising a hand. Don't tell me. I'm happier not knowing. She nodded solemnly. A wise decision. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Outside the wide observation panel on the far wall, stars drifted slowly, and Cameron realized with a small shock that the station was rotating, the movement so smooth he had not noticed it before. Where are we? He asked. Orbiting a red dwarf system, Lyra'sen said. A quiet region. Few ships pass through. Cameron watched the distant stars. 20 years. The galaxy he had known was gone, replaced by one he had yet to understand. Lyra'sen, he said after a while. Yes. When you told me about the marriage, why? She did not answer at once. Her gaze lowered, and for the first time since he had met her, she seemed uncertain. In my culture, she said slowly, to bond with someone who is dying is an act of mercy. It means they do not leave the universe alone. It is believed that consciousness lingers differently when it knows it is cherished. Cameron listened quietly. I believed you would not survive, she continued. Your neural activity was fading. I thought it would give you peace. And then I didn't die, Cameron said. No, she said softly. You did not. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Well, Cameron said finally, I suppose I should apologize for surviving. Very inconsiderate of me. Lyra'sen stared at him, then burst into laughter, the sound warm and unguarded. Cameron found himself laughing too, the tension easing like a knot slowly untying. For the first time since waking, the future did not feel quite so heavy. Cameron's first attempt to stand lasted exactly 3 seconds. The moment his feet touched the floor, his legs trembled as if they belonged to someone else entirely. He took one cautious step, felt the strength drain from his knees, and sat down rather abruptly on the edge of the bed. Well, he said, breathing carefully. That was graceful. Lyra'sen, who had been standing close by in case he needed support, tried very hard not to smile. Your balance will return, she said gently. Your nervous system is still recalibrating. I feel like a newborn deer, Cameron muttered. I am unfamiliar with that animal. They fall down a lot, he said. I am honoring a proud terrestrial tradition. She helped him to his feet again, this time keeping a steadying hand on his arm. Together they moved slowly across the room, each step deliberate. The floor itself seemed to respond to their movement, subtly adjusting its texture to provide better traction, a feature Cameron noticed with quiet fascination. Adaptive surfaces, he said. Nice. Yes, Lyra'sen replied. It reduces injuries during rehabilitation. Also useful for people who walk like collapsing furniture, Cameron added. They reached the wide observation panel at the far end of the chamber. Beyond it, the stars stretched in endless silence, scattered across a velvet darkness that felt deeper than anything Cameron remembered. A faint red glow burned at the edge of the view, the small, distant sun of the system. He rested a hand against the transparent surface, feeling the coolness beneath his fingertips. It's quieter than I expected, he said. This region is seldom traveled, Lyra'sen said. Most trade routes shifted decades ago. Decades. The word still felt strange, like wearing clothes that did not quite fit. What year is it? Cameron asked. She told him. He let out a low whistle. I've missed a lot. Yes, she said softly. They stood in silence for a while, watching a distant transport vessel glide slowly across the stars, its engines leaving faint lines of ionized light. Cameron followed its movement with his eyes. I used to fly, he said after a moment. Long-haul routes mostly. Cargo, sometimes passengers. Nothing glamorous, but I liked it. You still remember the feeling, Lyra'sen said. Pieces of it, Cameron admitted. The way the controls vibrated when the engine spooled up. The sound of the hull cooling after a jump. The smell of recycled air and bad coffee. What is coffee? Cameron turned to her, genuinely shocked. You don't know coffee? No. He stared at her for several seconds. We are correcting that as soon as possible. I don't care if I have to reintroduce caffeine to an entire civilization. I am not certain that is medically advisable, she said, though her eyes were amused. They continued their slow walk, leaving the recovery chamber and entering a corridor that curved gently in both directions. The walls were smooth and pale, embedded with shifting bands of light that pulsed faintly, almost like breathing. Small hovering devices moved silently along the ceiling, occasionally stopping to adjust panels or inspect surfaces. One of them drifted closer to Cameron, emitting a soft chime. It's staring at me, he said quietly. It is scanning you, Lyra'sen corrected. It's staring, Cameron insisted. The device emitted another chime and moved away as if offended. I think I hurt its feelings, Cameron said. They do not have feelings. You say that, but I saw judgment in that chime. Lyra'sen laughed softly, and the sound echoed faintly down the corridor. They entered a wider section of the station where several passageways intersected. Through an open archway, Cameron glimpsed a large chamber filled with plants growing in tiered rows under bright artificial light. The air smelled faintly of soil and something sweet. Hydroponics, Lyra'sen said, noticing his interest. Part of our food supply. Cameron leaned slightly against the doorway, studying the unfamiliar shapes of the plants, some with translucent leaves, others with stems that spiraled upward in slow, deliberate coils. Everything feels different, he said quietly. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. That is understandable, she said. You have awakened in a time that is not your own. He glanced at her. And yet you seem very familiar. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Lyra'sen looked momentarily surprised, then lowered her gaze, a faint warmth touching her expression. I spoke to you every day, she said. Perhaps some part of you remembers. Maybe, Cameron said softly. They resumed walking. His steps were steadier now, though fatigue crept into his muscles, a slow burning ache that reminded him how fragile his body still was. Eventually they reached a small lounge overlooking another section of space, furnished with low seats that adjusted automatically as they sat. Cameron exhaled, grateful for the rest. I feel like I just climbed a mountain. You walked 200 meters, Lyra'sen said. It was a very impressive 200 meters. She smiled. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching distant stars drift past the viewing pane. A faint vibration passed through the station, barely noticeable. What was that? Cameron asked. Minor course correction, Lyra'sen said. The station adjusts its orbit periodically. Cameron nodded, then glanced at her. Do you ever leave this place? Sometimes, she said, but I have been here. A long time. Waiting for patients to wake up. Her eyes met his, waiting for one in particular. Cameron looked away, suddenly unsure what to say. The weight of her words lingered in the quiet air between them, not oppressive, but undeniable. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Well," he said lightly, "I suppose I should apologize again for taking so long. Next time I'll try to recover faster." Lyra'sen shook her head, smiling. "I will hold you to that." They sat together, watching the slow, endless movement of the stars. And for the first time since waking, Cameron felt a strange, fragile sense of peace settling over him, like the first calm after a long and violent storm. The dreams began 3 nights later. Cameron did not realize at first that they were dreams. They felt too vivid, too sharp at the edges, as if someone had taken fragments of memory and polished them until they cut. He was in a cockpit. Warning lights burned red across the instrument panels, and the air smelled of insulation melting under heat. Somewhere behind him, metal screamed, a deep, tearing sound that vibrated through his bones. He reached for the controls, but his hands moved sluggishly, as if the universe itself resisted him. Then came the silence, the terrible, suffocating silence of vacuum swallowing sound, and the stars outside began to spin. Cameron woke with a sharp breath, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. The room was dim, the gentle blue lights of the ceiling steady and calm, the quiet hum of the station surrounding him like a blanket. For several seconds he lay still, listening to his breathing, waiting for the echoes of the dream to fade. They did not fade completely. A soft movement nearby made him turn his head. Lyra'sen sat in a chair beside the bed, a data display dimmed in her lap. She must have been there for hours. "You were dreaming," she said quietly. "Yeah," Cameron replied, running a hand across his face. "I think my brain decided to replay the worst day of my life in high definition." She studied him carefully. "Do you remember more than before?" "Not clearly," he said. "Just pieces. Fire, noise, the feeling that everything was about to end." Lyra'sen nodded slowly. "Memory often returns in fragments. I was hoping it would return in neat, well-organized chapters," Cameron said, "preferably with a summary at the beginning. I am afraid the brain does not function that way." "Very inconsiderate of it." She smiled faintly, though concern still lingered in her eyes. "Are you in pain?" she asked. "Only the usual existential kind," Cameron replied. "Nothing severe." Lyra'sen exhaled softly, half amused, half relieved. Later that day, she insisted he continue his rehabilitation exercises in one of the station's larger recovery chambers. The room was wide and open, its walls lined with softly glowing panels that adjusted gravity in localized zones. Cameron stepped into one of these fields and immediately felt his body grow heavier, the gentle pull strengthening his muscles as he walked. "This feels like walking on a planet again," he said. "That is the idea," Lyra'sen replied. He took several careful steps, then glanced at her. "If I collapse, I want it on record that I collapsed heroically." "I will make a note in your file," she said solemnly. "Cause of fall, excessive heroism." "Good," Cameron said. "I have a reputation to maintain." They worked for nearly an hour. Cameron's legs trembled by the end, but he managed to remain upright, which he considered a significant victory. As they rested on a low bench near the wall, he noticed a group of small, hovering drones clustered near the ceiling, their lenses focused in his direction. "They're watching me again," he said. "They are monitoring your progress," Lyra'sen corrected. "They're judging my form," Cameron insisted. "I can feel it." One of the drones emitted a faint, disapproving beep. "See?" Cameron said. "That one definitely thinks I'm doing it wrong." Lyra'sen laughed, the sound echoing lightly through the chamber. After the session, they walked slowly through a different section of the station. This corridor was lined with transparent panels revealing internal systems, streams of glowing coolant flowing through crystalline conduits, magnetic rings rotating in silent synchronization, and clusters of luminous energy cells pulsing like slow artificial hearts. Cameron paused to watch the machinery. "I used to think I understood ships," he said, "but this feels alive." "In some ways it is," Lyra'sen said. "The station's systems adapt continuously. It learns from the needs of its inhabitants. So if I start talking to the walls, it will talk back?" "Possibly," Cameron considered this. "I should be careful what I complain about then." They continued on, eventually reaching a quiet observation dome. The red dwarf star hung low beyond the transparent curve, its light casting long, copper-colored reflections across the floor. Cameron stood there for a long time, watching the slow drift of distant asteroids. "I keep thinking about the time I lost," he said at last. 20 years. Everyone I knew. They moved on. Or they're gone." Lyra'sen stood beside him, her hands folded loosely. "Time moves for everyone," she said gently, "but not always in the same way." He glanced at her. "What about you? What did you lose while I was asleep?" She was silent for a moment. "Opportunities," she said finally. "Other paths. A life that might have been simpler. And you stayed here anyway." "Yes." Cameron studied her profile, the way the soft light traced the curve of her long ears, the quiet steadiness in her expression. "You must be very stubborn," he said. "So I have been told," she replied. He smiled faintly. "I think I'm glad you are." They stood in silence again, the vastness of space stretching endlessly before them. A faint shimmer passed across the viewing field as a distant vessel engaged its jump drive, vanishing in a brief, silent flash. Cameron watched the empty space where it had been. For a moment he felt the old ache again, the pull of the stars, the restless urge to move, to fly, to go anywhere but remain still. Then he looked at Lyra'sen, standing quietly beside him, and the ache softened, changing into something quieter, something steadier. "Lyra'sen," he said. "Yes?" "If I start sleep-talking again," he said, "please don't let me negotiate with any more maintenance drones." She laughed softly. "I promise." The first time Cameron felt strong enough to walk alone, he insisted on proving it immediately. Lyra'sen had stepped out of the recovery chamber for only a few minutes when he decided the moment had arrived. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, stood carefully, and took a step. It went well. The second step also went well. The third step introduced a sudden and very personal conversation between gravity and his knees. He managed to reach the wall before the floor claimed him completely, leaning there and breathing carefully while pretending, mostly to himself, that this had been part of the plan all along. When Lyra'sen returned and found him standing with one hand braced against the wall, she raised an eyebrow. "I am conducting independent research," Cameron announced. "On what?" she asked. "The exact point at which my legs file a formal complaint." She crossed the room and gently guided him back toward the bed. "You should not push yourself so quickly." "If I don't push," Cameron said, "I'll never get back to flying." The words slipped out before he could stop them. For a moment, the air between them grew quiet. Lyra'sen did not answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted a scanner near his shoulder, studying the readings with careful attention. "You may fly again someday," she said softly, "but recovery cannot be rushed." Cameron nodded, though a restless tension stirred somewhere deep inside him, like an engine that wanted to start but could not yet turn. Later that day, she took him to a part of the station he had not yet seen. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber filled with suspended platforms, each holding complex instruments or containment fields glowing faintly in shifting colors. Transparent tubes carried streams of luminous particles between stations, and distant mechanical arms moved with silent precision. "What is this place?" Cameron asked. "A neural research wing," Lyra'sen said. "Part of where we treated you." Cameron looked around slowly. "You rebuilt parts of my brain here." "Yes." He tried to imagine it. Months of careful work, delicate interventions, conversations spoken to someone who could not answer. The thought made him strangely quiet. One of the suspended platforms nearby emitted a soft chime, and a small spherical device floated toward them, projecting a gentle field of light over Cameron's head. "What's it doing?" he asked. "Measuring cognitive response patterns," Lyra'sen said. Cameron glanced up at the sphere. "Be honest, is it reading my thoughts?" "No." "Good," he said. "I'd hate for anyone to know how often I'm thinking about food." Lyra'sen laughed, and the sphere drifted away as if satisfied. They continued walking, passing through a gallery where large transparent panels displayed slowly rotating star charts. The constellations were unfamiliar, their patterns different from anything Cameron remembered. "The galaxy feels bigger than it used to," he said. "It is not larger," Lyra'sen replied. "Only more of it has been explored." Same difference, Cameron said. When I went to sleep, half of these systems weren't even on the maps. They stopped at a viewing platform overlooking the docking ring. Several ships rested there. Sleek courier vessels, heavy transports, and one enormous medical frigate, whose hull shimmered with layered shielding arrays. Cameron leaned slightly against the railing, studying the ships with quiet intensity. I used to know every sound a ship could make, he said. The hum of the engines, the vibration through the deck plates. I could tell if something was wrong just by listening. Lyra'sen watched him. You still listen that way, she said. He glanced at her. What do you mean? You notice details others ignore. The rhythm of machinery, the way systems interact. It is part of who you are. Cameron considered this, then smiled faintly. I suppose some things survive 20 years of sleep. They stood there for a while, watching a cargo shuttle detach and drift slowly away from the station, its thrusters glowing softly. Lyra'sen, he said after a moment. Yes? When you talked to me while I was asleep, what did you say? She hesitated, clearly not expecting the question. Many things, she said. I told you about my work, about the patients, about the stars outside. Sometimes I read you stories. What kind of stories? Old ones, she said. From my world. Legends about explorers who sailed between suns. Cameron smiled. I would have liked those. You did, she said quietly. Your neural patterns became more stable when I read them. He looked at her, a strange warmth settling in his chest. Then I guess I owe you thanks, not just for saving my life, but for keeping me company while I was gone. Lyra'sen's expression softened. You were never gone, she said. Not entirely. They returned to the recovery wing as the station's artificial lights shifted to simulate evening. Cameron was tired, the kind of deep, bone-heavy fatigue that came from real effort, but it was a satisfying tiredness, the kind that meant progress. As he lay down, he glanced at Lyra'sen, who was reviewing data at the console. You know, he said, if I ever do get back to flying, I might insist on a co-pilot who tells stories during long trips. She looked up, surprised. You would want that? Of course, Cameron said. Every pilot needs someone to keep them from negotiating with maintenance drones out of boredom. Lyra'sen laughed softly, and the sound lingered in the quiet room long after the lights dimmed. The station alarm sounded without warning. It was not the harsh, panicked shriek Cameron remembered from damaged ships, but a low, steady tone that pulsed through the corridors like a distant heartbeat. He sat up immediately, every nerve sharpening with the instinctive alertness of someone who had spent years responding to emergencies. Lyra'sen was already on her feet, scanning a display that had appeared in the air beside her. What is it? Cameron asked. A transport is approaching, she said. Severe hull damage. Multiple life sign anomalies. Anomalies doesn't sound good, Cameron said. It is not. Within minutes, the quiet rhythm of the station transformed into focused motion. Medical teams moved through the corridors, equipment drones streaked past carrying sealed containers, and guidance beacons lit along the docking ring. Cameron followed Lyra'sen as far as the main observation gallery overlooking the docking bay. Beyond the transparent barrier, a small transport vessel drifted into position, its outer plating scorched and fractured, one engine dark and lifeless. Even from a distance, Cameron could see where micrometeor impacts had pitted the hull like scars. That ship barely made it, he murmured. Yes, Lyra'sen said. We must work quickly. The docking clamps engaged with a deep, resonant vibration that Cameron felt through the floor. Airlocks sealed, pressure equalized, and moments later the first stretchers emerged through the inner hatch, guided by drones and medics. Cameron watched, his hands tightening on the railing. Something inside him stirred, not memory exactly, but reflex, the ingrained awareness of crisis and motion, of people depending on swift decisions. I should help, he said quietly. Lyra'sen glanced at him. You are still recovering. I know, he said, but I can coordinate, carry equipment, something. For a moment she studied him, weighing the risk. Then she nodded once. Stay with me. They entered the triage chamber, where controlled urgency filled the air. Patients lay on hovering platforms while scanners passed over them in shimmering arcs of light. Voices spoke in calm, precise tones, relaying data and instructions. Cameron found himself moving instinctively, handing instruments to a medic, adjusting a support frame, guiding a hovering stretcher into position. His body still tired quickly, but his mind felt clear, focused, alive in a way it had not since he woke. At one point, a small service drone drifted uncertainly in the path of a stretcher, its sensors blinking rapidly. "Excuse me," Cameron said, gently nudging it aside. "Emergency coming through." The drone emitted a brief tone that sounded suspiciously like embarrassment and moved away. "I think that one likes you," Lyra'sen said as she passed. "I have that effect on machines," Cameron replied. "They sense my authority." Hours passed in a blur of activity. Gradually, the influx of patients slowed, and the chamber grew quieter. The last stretcher was moved into recovery, and the medical teams began the careful process of stabilization and monitoring. Cameron sank onto a bench near the wall, exhaustion settling into his muscles like lead. Lyra'sen sat beside him, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the alarm. "You did well," she said. "I mostly handed people things and tried not to fall over," Cameron said. "That is still help," she replied. He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. It felt familiar, being in the middle of something that mattered. Lyra'sen was silent for a moment. "You were always meant to move," she said softly. "Some people are not built for stillness." Cameron opened his eyes and looked at her. "What about you?" "I am content here," she said, "helping others return to movement." He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose we make a good team. You fix people and I try not to break anything." They both laughed quietly, the tension of the day easing at last. Later, after the station returned to its normal rhythm, they sat in a small dining area overlooking a field of drifting asteroids. A meal rested between them, simple, warm, and blessedly non-glowing. Cameron took a bite and sighed. "I never thought I'd be so happy to eat something that looks like actual food." "It is actual food," Lyra'sen said. "That's what worries me," he replied. She shook her head, smiling. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, watching distant mining lights flicker among the rocks. "You were different today," Lyra'sen said at last. "Different how?" "More certain. More like the person you were before." Cameron considered this. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm just becoming someone new." Lyra'sen looked at him thoughtfully. "Is that frightening?" "Not as much as it used to be," he admitted. "I think I'm starting to understand something." "What?" "That memory isn't the only thing that makes you who you are. Sometimes it's what you choose to do next." Lyra'sen's expression softened, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the asteroids drifted slowly in silent orbits, ancient and patient, while the station moved steadily among the stars. The message arrived on a quiet morning cycle, when the station lights were shifting gradually toward the pale gold of simulated dawn. Cameron was in the rehabilitation chamber, walking slowly along the gravity track, when Lyra'sen's voice came through the comm panel. "Cameron, I think you should come to the navigation dome." There was something in her tone, calm but carrying a weight that made him increase his pace despite the ache in his legs. By the time he reached the dome, she was standing near the central display, a projection of star charts suspended in the air before her. Several unfamiliar symbols pulsed along the edge of the map. "What is it?" Cameron asked. "A transmission," she said, "from a registry archive. We finally located records from your former shipping company." Cameron felt a faint tightening in his chest. "And they confirmed the destruction of your ship. There were no other survivors." She hesitated. "But there is more." The display shifted, revealing a smaller file, an encoded message, time-stamped nearly 20 years earlier. "This was recovered from your emergency pod's recorder," Lyra'sen said softly. "It appears you left a personal log just before entering stasis." Cameron stared at the file for a long moment. "I don't remember doing that." "Would you like to hear it?" He nodded. The recording began with a burst of static, then his own voice filled the dome, strained, breathless, but unmistakably his. "If anyone finds this, my name is Cameron Wells. The ship is lost. I've sealed myself in the pod. I don't know how long I'll last, but if I don't make it—" The voice faltered, then steadied. "Whoever finds this, if there's anyone left to hear it, I hope I wasn't alone at the end. The recording ended. Silence settled in the dome, vast and heavy as space itself. Cameron exhaled slowly, his hands resting against the edge of the console. I don't remember saying that, he said quietly. Lyra'sen stood beside him. But you felt it, he nodded. For a long time they stood without speaking. Then Cameron straightened, his expression calm, in a way she had not seen before. I wasn't alone, he said. Not in the end. Lyra'sen's eyes glistened, but she smiled. In the weeks that followed, Cameron's strength returned steadily. He could walk the length of the station without stopping now, and sometimes he even jogged short distances, though he insisted on calling it controlled forward falling. One afternoon he stood in the docking bay, watching a courier vessel prepare for departure. The low hum of its engines vibrated through the deck, and something inside him stirred. Not the restless ache he had once felt, but a quieter awareness, like a memory of wind on his face. Lyra'sen joined him. You are thinking about flying again, she said. Yes, Cameron admitted, but not the way I used to. What do you mean? He gestured toward the station around them, the corridors, the lights, the distant movement of patients and staff. I used to think moving meant going somewhere far away. Now I think it means choosing where you belong. Lyra'sen was silent for a moment. And where do you belong? She asked. Cameron looked at her. Here, for now, with you. They began working together more formally after that. Cameron assisted with coordination during emergencies, his instincts as a pilot translating naturally into managing complex operations. He never rushed, never raised his voice, but there was a steady confidence in the way he moved, a calm clarity that others began to rely on. One evening after a long shift, they sat in the observation dome, watching the red dwarf star sink slowly beyond the curve of the station. Do you ever regret it? Cameron asked suddenly. Regret what? The bonding ritual, choosing someone who couldn't choose you back. Lyra'sen considered the question carefully. I wondered at first, she admitted. I feared I had bound myself to a ghost. And now? She looked at him, her expression warm and steady. Now I know I chose a man who would eventually choose me in return. Cameron smiled faintly. That sounds dangerously close to romance. It is, she said, smiling back. A small maintenance drone drifted past them, paused and emitted a soft chime before continuing on its way. I think that one remembers you, Lyra'sen said. I have made many powerful alliances, Cameron replied solemnly. They both laughed, the sound carrying softly through the dome. Later, standing at the great window, Cameron watched the stars and felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The past was still a part of him, but it no longer defined him. The man who had entered that emergency pod had been afraid of dying alone. The man who stood here now understood something deeper, that life was not measured by the years one remembered, but by the connections one chose to build. He glanced at Lyra'sen, standing beside him, her long ears outlined in the soft starlight, her expression peaceful. Lyra'sen, he said. Yes? I'm glad I woke up. She took his hand, her fingers warm and steady. So am I. Outside, the station continued its silent orbit, a small island of light in an endless sea of stars, carrying within it two lives that had once been strangers and were now, by choice rather than circumstance, moving forward together into whatever future awaited them.